My son leaned in and whispered, "Don't embarrass me today." So I waited until every guest was seated, every eye on me. I stepped to the podium, unfolded the will, and read every stolen truth out loud. By the time I finished, he wasn't worried about embarrassment. He was worried about consequences. Because I didn't raise a son who respects legacy. I raised the man who tried to rewrite it and failed. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The church hall smells of lilies and the faintest hint of something stale, like time itself settled into the polished pews. The low hum of murmured conversations fills the air, mingling with the soft clink of silverware being adjusted on the buffet table just beyond the doors. Guests shuffle in and out, the polite shuffle of high heels against old wood. There is a murmur of sympathy in every exchange, and beneath it all, an undercurrent of something else, something unspoken. Jerry stands near the back of the hall, her hands folded in front of her, fingers brushing the edges of the envelope in her handbag. Her husband's memorial service is just beginning to feel like a performance, a choreographed dance of grief, polite smiles, empty condolences. She watches, detached, as Mark moves like a puppet master among the guests, making sure everything fits perfectly in its place. The seating chart, the obituary, the tone, everything exactly as he wants it. He is talking to someone, a guest, someone he knows from the club, and as he does, he glances toward her. The momentary shift in his gaze is enough for Jerry to feel the invisible tension between them, a weight she's been carrying for days now. Then, Mark begins to move toward her. Her heart doesn't speed up. It doesn't race. It simply tightens. The air between them thickens, a space filled with the echoes of what's to come. She's known this moment was inevitable, had been waiting for it. But still, her chest tightens in the way only a mother's heart can when her son gets too close, too calculating. Mark stops a few feet from her, glancing quickly to make sure no one's paying attention. His voice is low, a whisper meant for only her ears, but loud enough for the weight of his control to land heavily between them. "Keep it simple," he murmurs, his eyes flicking over her, then back toward the crowd, checking for eyes. "Don't cry, don't. Be too much." Vanessa appears at his side a moment later, smoothing her dress, already perfect in her crisp, tailored way. There's no warmth in the smile she offers as she crosses Jerry's path, only the sharpness of a woman who knows her place in this charade. Mark's words linger, curling around Jerry's heart like a vine. The warning, the command. It's not the first time he's said something like this, but something about the way he says it now, the way he looks at her, feels different. More pointed, more certain. But Jerry doesn't respond. Not immediately. She breathes through her nose, steadying herself, fingers pressing into the edge of the envelope, as if she could push back the wave of emotion that threatens to break through. She's worked so hard to keep it all together, to keep the things that need to be said hidden for just a little longer. And then she feels it. Pastor Ray's eyes, watching her, as always, the quiet observer. Jerry's gaze briefly shifts toward him. Pastor Ray stands at the far side of the room, adjusting the microphone at the podium, preparing for the service to begin. His expression is unreadable, but there's an understanding there, a familiarity in the way his gaze holds hers for a fraction longer than necessary. Something in her chest loosens at the sight of him, like a small breath of air after being underwater for too long. But then Mark shifts, breaking the moment. His voice again, this time with a hint of frustration. "Mom," he presses, his eyes narrow. "Just, please. You know what I mean." Jerry's jaw clenches, but she holds her ground. She won't give him the satisfaction of knowing just how deeply his words wound her. She won't let him see the crack in her armor. "I know," she replies, her voice steady, a little too controlled. Her lips press together, and she nods. But it's not the words that matter now. It's the weight of what's coming. The truth she's about to speak. The truth that no one is ready to hear. Mark watches her a moment longer, as if assessing, before he turns back to Vanessa, who's already moving toward the front of the room to take her place by his side. The tension doesn't dissipate. It only hangs there, thick and oppressive. Jerry doesn't move. Her eyes are locked on the envelope, which she grips tighter as the first notes of the memorial service begin to play, a soft, melancholy hymn, more polished than personal. She feels the weight of the room press down on her, the eyes of the guests no longer just observing the service, but everything that will follow. And as she takes one last steadying breath, she realizes something. Her son has no idea what's coming: the will, the truth, and the reckoning. Jerry's fingers tighten around the envelope. It's time. The sound of the hymn fills the hall, muffled, as Jerry feels the weight of the silence between her and Mark. The soft hum of the crowd settles into the background as the slideshow flickers to life on the large screen at the front of the church hall. It's all so meticulously arranged, perfectly polished images, carefully chosen, like a brand new set of china. The kind of display that feels more like a marketing campaign than a tribute. Jerry stands at the edge of the room, her gaze fixed on the screen. The photos slide by: beach vacations, family barbecues, Mark in various states of triumph, at the country club, on a yacht, shaking hands with important people. But not once does the camera linger on the two people who should be at the heart of it all: her and her husband, the man they came to mourn. Not a single photo of the two of them together. It's subtle, intentional, but it's there, in every frame, like a ghost that refuses to be seen. Jerry's fingers curl into the fabric of her dress, the momentary tightness a small relief in the face of something far heavier. Her husband's absence is palpable in every image, every smile Mark and Vanessa offer to the crowd. Smiles that don't reach their eyes, smiles that have been rehearsed too many times to count. The slideshow continues, the cheerful soundtrack of beach waves and birthday parties filling the space, as if this were a celebration instead of a memorial. The transition between shots is so seamless that it almost feels like a funeral for a stranger, not the man she shared decades of her life with. The final photo flicks past, Mark, standing next to a car he'd bought last year. His hand on the door with an expression so smug it could have been taken from a magazine cover. But not a single image of her husband holding her hand, or them in front of their house, or even laughing together on one of the family trips. As the last photo fades, the video starts. Mark's voice echoes out over the speakers, a mixture of polished rhetoric and rehearsed nostalgia. Jerry's hands tremble slightly, her nails biting into the softness of her palms. She watches, but her thoughts drift back to a different time. Back to the vacations they had taken, the way they'd laughed together on those trips, when their hands were intertwined and the world hadn't yet started to fracture around them. The video plays. Vacation reels from Europe, speeches from business dinners, closing shots of Mark giving a toast at some event that she doesn't remember. There's no trace of the man she had loved, the man who had been her anchor for years. Only the smiling image of Mark, polished and untouchable. Jerry feels the coolness of the envelope in her handbag, pressing against her ribs like a secret that refuses to stay hidden. She stares at the screen, her eyes growing distant, the sound of Mark's voice mixing with the soft, comforting hum of the video's background music. It's all so carefully crafted. The perfect eulogy, the perfect tribute for the perfect son. Vanessa's voice cuts through the noise, her whisper barely audible over the quiet murmur of the crowd. "This is going so well," she says, a smile in her voice. But it's empty, cold. She's not talking about the memorial. She's talking about the show. The performance. The part where Mark's public image is preserved, polished, and revered. Jerry doesn't turn to look at her. Instead, she pushes through the knot in her chest and stands a little straighter. She moves slowly past the screen, her footsteps soundless on the thick carpet. Her eyes stay fixed ahead, steady as ever, even as the weight of the situation presses down on her. There's nothing she can do to stop the video now. Nothing she can say to rewind the moments that have led to this place. But she doesn't have to. Because what comes next, the part no one expects, is already written. As she moves closer to the podium, Jerry feels Pastor Ray's gaze on her. His eyes are calm, observant, but there's an unspoken understanding in the way he watches her. He knows. He knows exactly what this moment is. And he knows the weight of the truth she's carrying. He's been in her corner for so long, seen so much more than the polished public facade Mark wears. And right now, as Jerry passes by the screen, the one person who understands her, the one person who sees what no one else does, is silently watching. She feels his quiet support, like the faintest breeze that ruffles her hair. It's enough to steady her, even if just for a moment. The video finally ends, and the silence that follows is thick. Too thick. People start to murmur to each other, their voices filling the empty space left by the carefully curated film. The tension feels like a living thing, crawling through the room. Jerry steps to the front, the envelope heavier in her hand now, a reminder of the truth she is about to speak. Mark doesn't look at her, his attention fixed somewhere else. Vanessa shifts, her hands smoothing her dress once more, ready for whatever comes next, as if this moment is just another in the long line of performances they've been rehearsing for years. But it's not. It's time. Jerry clears her throat, the sound loud enough to draw every eye in the room. And the silence that follows is the kind that swallows all other sound. She lifts the envelope. The light in the kitchen that afternoon had been thin and gray, the kind that made everything look like an old photograph, edges soft, colors fading. Outside, the oak trees groaned under the weight of a late winter wind. Jerry stood at the sink, rinsing out 2 coffee mugs, the sound of water steady and comforting. Behind her, she could hear him, her husband, folding the morning paper with slow, deliberate care. "Jerry," he said finally. There was something in his tone, something quiet and tremulous, that made her pause mid-motion. She turned, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and saw that his fingers were shaking slightly, the paper trembling like dry leaves. His face looked older than it had the day before. She crossed to him, instinctively reaching for the coffee pot. "You need a refill?" He didn't answer. His eyes lifted to hers, steady now, but full of something she hadn't seen before. Not fear, exactly. Not guilt. Something heavier. Resignation, maybe. "Sit down," he said softly. She did. The chair creaked under her as she settled across from him. The distance between them felt strange, like there was a wall neither of them could name. He reached for her hand. His skin felt colder than usual. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "Before it gets worse." Jerry's breath caught, her heart skipping in quiet panic. For a second, she thought he was about to talk about his health again. The doctor's appointments. The medication he always insisted he didn't need. But then he looked at her differently. His eyes weren't pleading for mercy. They were pleading for trust. "It's about Mark," he said. She felt her body tense, her hand stiffening in his. He noticed but didn't let go. "What about him?" He hesitated, his thumb tracing the edge of her wedding ring. "He's been taking money." The words fell between them like glass. She blinked. "What do you mean, taking money?" He sighed and leaned back, rubbing his temples. "From the trust." Quietly. Little withdrawals at first. I noticed months ago, but I wanted to believe it was some misunderstanding. Then Donna called last week. Said there were transfers she couldn't explain. Transfers? Her voice rose, sharp and disbelieving. You mean he's stealing? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Jerry's chest constricted. My God, he's already spending what I haven't given him. Her husband finished for her, his tone raw. He bought that damn boat. The one he said was an investment opportunity. I wanted to tell you sooner, but I kept thinking I could fix it, that he'd come to his senses. The clock ticked on the wall, loud enough to fill the silence that followed. She wanted to cry, she wanted to shout. But instead, she just sat there, staring at the hands that had built a family, a home, a legacy. Hands that now trembled over a secret too big to hold. He reached for a folder that had been sitting at the corner of the table. Inside were papers. Neat, precise, familiar. Legal documents. I've already called Donna, he said quietly. We're updating the will. Her eyes snapped up. The will? He nodded. There's no other way. I can't let him destroy everything we built. The kitchen door creaked open then, and Donna Pierce stepped in, her winter coat still buttoned, hair tousled by the wind. She looked from one to the other, reading the heaviness in the room in an instant. I came as soon as he called, she said, her voice low but firm. We'll do this the right way. They sat together at the table, the three of them, while Donna opened her leather folder and began sorting the documents. The smell of ink and paper filled the air, mingling with the faint aroma of the coffee that had long gone cold. Her husband dictated the words slowly, deliberately, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Any heir found to have accessed or misused family trust funds prior to my passing shall forfeit all inheritance, he said. Then, looking directly at Jerry, he added, and this clause is not to be omitted. Donna wrote it out in clean, looping script, her pen scratching softly against the paper. When she finished, she pushed the sheet toward him. He signed with quiet resolve, the sound of the pen's click echoing louder than it should have. Then, he looked at Jerry. You'll read it, he said, his eyes never leaving hers. When the time comes. Her breath caught. I can't. You can. He interrupted gently. And you will. Read it out loud. Let everyone know what's true. The words lodged deep inside her, heavy and unshakable. A command, but also a plea. Donna slid the completed will into a new folder, pressing her seal over the flap with careful precision. It's done, she said. This version stands. Her husband reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers once more. Promise me, Jerry. Her throat burned. I promise. He smiled then, faintly, tiredly, but with something like peace flickering behind his eyes. Good. Then we're settled. The wind howled outside, rattling the window panes. The papers on the table fluttered for a moment, then went still. Jerry sat there long after Donna had gone, after the front door had closed, after her husband had retreated to his chair by the fireplace. The house was quiet except for the steady ticking of the clock and the faint hum of the furnace. She looked down at the sealed envelope Donna had left in her hands. It felt heavier than paper should. When she finally stood, her eyes were blurred with tears she hadn't realized were falling. She pressed the envelope to her chest, the promise echoing through her mind. Read it out loud. Let everyone know what's true. Outside, the wind grew harsher. Inside, Jerry whispered to the empty room, I will. And the sound of her own voice made her shiver. The final hymn faded, its last note trembling through the air before dissolving into silence. All that remained was the faint hum of the microphone and the soft rustle of people shifting in their seats. Pastor Ray stood at the podium, his voice steady, his words deliberate, an anchor in a room that had become far too polished, too rehearsed to feel real. "Let us bow our heads," he said. The congregation obeyed, heads dipping in neat unison. But Jerry didn't close her eyes. She watched as Mark stood at the front, his hand resting lightly on Vanessa's shoulder, chin tilted at that exact angle he used for photos. Watched as her husband's framed picture glowed faintly under the church's overhead lights, his warm smile now a backdrop to Mark's performance. Pastor Ray's words drifted over the crowd. Something about peace, about eternal rest. But all Jerry could hear were the sounds beneath it. The clink of someone's bracelet, the soft coughs of guests waiting for permission to leave, the faint murmur of impatience. Her hands rested in her lap, the envelope hidden beneath her folded fingers. It felt hot now, like it had a pulse of its own. When Pastor Ray finally closed his prayer with a gentle amen, the room exhaled as one. Mark stepped forward immediately, his timing perfect. "Thank you," he began, his tone a smooth blend of sorrow and control. "Thank you, everyone, for coming to celebrate my father's life. He paused, lowering his head, just enough to make it seem heartfelt. He was a man of quiet dignity, and I think he'd want us to remember the good, to move forward with grace." His gaze swept the crowd, then landed, briefly, on her. A warning hidden in a look. The same look he'd given her in the hallway earlier, the one that said, "Don't ruin this." Vanessa was quick to step in, smiling that delicate, hostess smile that never reached her eyes. "Please, everyone," she said softly, "join us for the reception. We have food and refreshments in the next room." There it was, the tidy conclusion, the fade out before the credits rolled. Guests began to stir. Whispers, the soft shuffle of heels, chairs scraping against the floor. The low murmur of conversation began to fill the space like static. Someone laughed too brightly near the back, eager to pivot from grief to comfort food. Mark looked relieved, shoulders loosening as he gestured toward the buffet. Vanessa was already directing traffic, ushering people toward the door, all smooth gestures and brittle grace. And Jerry? She stayed seated. She stared straight ahead, her eyes fixed on the podium, her heartbeat drumming in her ears. The air around her felt too thin, the lights too bright. Her husband's photograph stared back at her from the easel beside the altar, his expression caught forever in that small, knowing smile. She could almost hear his voice again, soft, trembling, certain. "Read it out loud. Let everyone know what's true." Her fingers tightened around the envelope. Pastor Ray caught her eye from across the room. He didn't speak, didn't move, just gave the smallest of nods, the kind of gesture that said, "It's time." Jerry rose slowly. The movement was subtle at first, barely a ripple in the flow of people. Then the air shifted. A few guests paused, uncertain. The murmur dulled. Mark turned, confusion flickering across his face. "Mom?" he said, his voice low, uncertain. Jerry didn't look at him. She stepped toward the center aisle, her heels clicking softly against the tile floor. Each step echoed louder than it should have, like the room itself was holding its breath. When she reached the podium, she placed the envelope down gently, her hand resting over it for a moment. "I have something to read," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. It had the kind of calm that made people stop moving, stop whispering. Mark froze. "Mom, now's not—" She looked up, her gaze locking onto his. Her tone didn't waver. "It won't take long." A ripple of unease moved through the crowd. Guests glanced at each other, sensing the undercurrent they couldn't yet name. Vanessa's smile faltered, a crack forming in her perfect composure. Jerry slipped a hand into her bag and pulled out the envelope, the one sealed 6 months ago in that gray kitchen, the one that had haunted her every day since. The flap tore open with a soft, deliberate sound. Mark took a step forward. "Mother." Sit down, Mark, Pastor Ray said quietly from his corner. The room fell into silence. Jerry unfolded the papers inside, her husband's handwriting faint but firm along the margins. The scent of old ink filled her nose. Her voice trembled only once as she began, steadying herself against the podium. "This is the last will and testament of Henry Thomas Brooks," she read. The air turned to glass. Every sound, every whisper, every breath stopped. And as she looked up from the page, meeting her son's stunned eyes, a calm unlike anything she'd felt in months washed over her. It had begun. The paper trembled slightly in her hands, not from weakness, but from the quiet electricity pulsing through the room. Jerry's voice carried over the pews, crisp and deliberate, every syllable slicing through the murmurs that tried to rise. "This is the last will and testament of Henry Thomas Brooks," she repeated, letting the words settle like dust after an explosion. Somewhere near the front, a fork clinked against a plate. Then even that sound died. Her eyes moved down the page. The ink was faint in places, her husband's handwriting dense and careful, his signature flourish at the end of each paragraph. She could still remember him leaning over that kitchen table, his hand shaking, insisting on writing the date himself. She found it now. "Dated," she read, her tone firm. "August 14th, this year." A beat of silence, then another. It took a moment for anyone to do the math, to realize what it meant. That the will was barely 2 months old, rewritten well after her husband's last hospital visit. Long after Mark thought every matter had been settled, finalized, safely under his control. Mark's expression faltered, the color draining from his face. His jaw tightened, his posture too stiff for the casual image he tried to maintain. Beside him, Vanessa's hand fluttered to her chest, her smile frozen mid-expression. 2 months? Someone whispered from the second row. Jerry kept reading. "The undersigned declares this to be his final and complete will, superseding all prior versions, regardless of date or custodian. The distribution of assets herein reflects my full and deliberate intent." Her husband's words, not the lawyer's, not anyone else's, his. A low murmur rippled through the hall, the kind of collective confusion that made people lean closer instead of away. Mark took a small step forward. "Mom, this isn't—" Jerry lifted a hand, silencing him without even looking up. "The next clause," she continued, "addresses matters of the family trust and its heirs." Pastor Ray stood quietly at the back, his hands folded. He looked like a man watching a storm he'd known was coming. Jerry's voice did not tremble. "Any heir," she read, each word measured, "who accesses family trust funds or assets prior to the official settlement date shall forfeit their inheritance in full." The sentence landed like a gunshot. There was an audible inhale from somewhere in the crowd. A few heads turned toward Mark before anyone even processed why. Vanessa blinked rapidly, her face pale and sharp under the fluorescent lights. Jerry didn't look up, not yet. She could feel the weight of their stares, the way the air seemed to close in around her. But she kept her eyes on the page. "This clause," she continued, "applies specifically to the conduct of Mark Brooks." It was the moment the world seemed to stop. Vanessa's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Mark's hands, so steady during every business pitch, every real estate presentation, every perfectly rehearsed gesture of charm, now twitched at his sides. A few guests shifted uncomfortably, trying to make sense of what they were hearing. The air buzzed with disbelief. "Mom," Mark said finally, his voice low and strangled, "you don't understand what you're reading." But she did. Every word. Every intention. She lowered the paper just enough to meet his eyes. "Your father made it very clear," she said softly. "He knew what he was writing." Mark took a step forward, his voice rising. "This," This isn't legal. You can't just stand there and sit down, Pastor Ray said again, firmer this time. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. The authority in his tone broke through Mark's panic, anchoring the room in a fragile silence. Jerry lifted her gaze at last, scanning the faces in front of her. The longtime family friends, the church members, the neighbors who'd known them for decades. All of them were watching now, their grief replaced by the unmistakable spark of curiosity. Then her eyes found Emma. Her granddaughter sat halfway down the aisle, posture straight, eyes wide, not in fear, but in something deeper. Awareness. The 17-year-old's gaze darted from her father to her grandmother, searching for meaning. When their eyes met, Jerry saw it. The flicker of understanding. The same quiet strength her husband once carried. Jerry gave her a single, almost imperceptible nod. Emma didn't speak, but her expression said enough. I know, Grandma. I believe you. Vanessa finally found her voice, brittle and breathless. Geraldine, this isn't the time. Jerry's tone cut through her like ice. It's the truth. Silence again. A deep, brittle silence that made every heartbeat in the room sound louder. Jerry turned the page. My husband wrote this by hand, she said, her voice softer now but unwavering. He signed it with Donna Pierce as witness and notary. This is the document that stands. She could feel Mark's stare, cold and burning, but she didn't look his way. Not yet. Because this wasn't over. She wasn't just reading a document. She was dismantling an illusion, piece by piece, clause by clause. And as the paper trembled faintly in her grip, the faintest smile tugged at her lips. Her husband's words echoed in her mind, clear as the day he spoke them. Read it out loud. Let everyone know what's true. She took a breath, readying herself for the next line. But then she caught sight of Emma, eyes glistening, lips parting as if to say something, and the sound that followed was small, almost swallowed, but unmistakable, a quiet gasp. The crowd turned toward her. Emma's gaze was fixed on her father. And in that charged second, as Mark's expression hardened, Jerry realized. This was only the beginning. For a full, echoing second after Jerry spoke her son's name, the world refused to move. Then the chaos began. Soft at first, like static building in the walls, the scrape of chairs, the sharp whisper of fabric as people shifted, unsure if they should stand or stay seated. Forks clattered against china, forgotten mid-bite. No one was eating anymore. The buffet tables, so carefully arranged by Vanessa that morning with polished silver trays and floral centerpieces, had gone still. Steam curled up from the untouched chafing dishes, fogging the air between the guests like a ghost that wouldn't leave. Someone whispered, "Did she just say Mark Brooks?" Someone else, "Forfeits his inheritance." The sound spread, rippling through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. Mark stood rigid at the front of the hall, the practiced smile gone. His jaw worked soundlessly before his voice finally caught up. This isn't accurate," he stammered. "It's not. Mom, that's not the version we—" He stopped himself, realizing too late what the slip revealed. Jerry didn't move. She didn't need to. The weight of the paper in her hand did the talking. Vanessa was the first to react. She glided forward in her black heels, every step measured, her expression a porcelain mask cracking under pressure. "Everyone," she began, with that brittle hostess voice, "why don't we all give Mrs. Brooks a moment? This has been emotional for her." Her tone was sugar, but her eyes screamed shut it down. No one moved. They weren't guests anymore. They were witnesses. "Please." Vanessa tried again, turning her attention toward Pastor Ray. "Maybe you could—" But before she could finish, the sound of heels clicked from the hallway. Sharp, steady, familiar. Donna Pierce. The room seemed to shift around her as she entered. Folders tucked neatly under one arm, her gray blazer immaculate, expression unreadable. She didn't hurry, didn't need to. The hush followed her like gravity. "Sorry I'm late," she said evenly, stepping into the center aisle. Her gaze met Jerry's, calm and knowing, before landing squarely on Mark. Traffic was murder. Mark's composure broke. "Donna, thank God, you can clear this up. Tell them this isn't—" She dropped the folders onto the nearest table with a flat thud. "It's the only version signed and notarized," she said. "2 months ago. My seal's still on the envelope if you'd like to inspect it." The murmurs died instantly. Vanessa's hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes darted toward Mark, pleading for him to do something, but there was nothing left to control. He looked cornered now, every ounce of charisma stripped away, replaced by the kind of panic he could no longer disguise. "Donna," he started again, softer, desperate. "Dad wasn't thinking clearly. He was sick. You know that." Donna's gaze was steady, merciless. "He was sharp enough to call me himself, sharp enough to dictate every word. I recorded the meeting as I do all revisions." The words landed like stones. Jerry didn't flinch. She only turned slightly toward Donna, her hand tightening over the podium's edge. The two women locked eyes for a heartbeat. Old friends bound not by years, but by the promise of truth. Vanessa tried once more, voice thin now. "This is a misunderstanding. We should all, everyone, move into the other room and—" A cough interrupted her. Not a real cough. Just Pastor Ray clearing his throat. The old man stepped forward, his tall frame cutting through the sea of whispers. The light from the stained glass windows behind him cast a soft wash of color over his gray suit. "Let her finish," he said quietly. It wasn't loud, but the authority in his voice rolled through the room like thunder. Jerry drew a slow breath. For the first time since the service began, she felt the tension loosen in her chest. Not gone, but shifted. The fear was still there, yes, but beneath it was something else. Steadier. Like the ghost of her husband's hand on her shoulder, reminding her to keep going. She turned back to the pages in front of her. "Thank you, Pastor." Mark made a strangled sound, half laugh, half protest. "You can't. Mom, you're humiliating yourself." But the word humiliating landed wrong now, bouncing back on him, the same way the light off his father's framed photo caught the side of his face. Cold, reflective, unforgiving. Jerry didn't look up. "The next section," she said, her voice quiet but commanding, "details the misuse of family funds." Donna folded her arms. A small, grim nod of confirmation. The guests leaned forward, caught in that breathless stillness that precedes disaster. Vanessa's eyes widened, Mark's Adam's apple bobbed. And just as Jerry parted her lips to begin the next line, a sudden crash broke the silence, the sound of a tray tipping at the buffet. Metal clanged, food spilled, and a startled waiter froze under the weight of every gaze. The moment was a heartbeat of chaos. Then it passed. Jerry lifted her chin, voice steady again. "Let's continue." But when she looked up, she found Emma watching her, not afraid this time, not confused, just waiting. And in that look, Jerry felt something shift. For the first time in 17 years, her granddaughter wasn't looking at her father for guidance. She was looking at her. Jerry lowered her gaze to the next paragraph, her pulse steady now. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the stained glass panes, the sound hollow and haunting, like a warning or a promise. Either way, the storm had finally found its way inside. The air inside the church hall felt charged, too heavy for breath, too quiet for safety. Every eye was locked on Jerry as she turned the page, the crisp sound of paper slicing through the silence like a blade. Her husband's handwriting filled the next section. Sharp, deliberate. The words pressed deep into the page. She could almost hear his voice again, calm and certain, when he dictated this part to Donna over the phone. The details were exact, painful. Jerry cleared her throat. The following, she read, documents an unauthorized withdrawal from the Brooks Family Trust account, recorded on March 12th of this year. The amount, $78,000. A low hum of disbelief rippled through the guests. Someone gasped softly. Someone else whispered Mark's name. She looked up, just for a second. Mark's face was stone. The same face that had once charmed investors, city officials, everyone who'd ever doubted him. Now it twitched, just slightly around the eyes. Her gaze dropped back to the page. The funds, she continued, were used as a deposit on a 28-foot Sea Ray Sundancer, registered in Mark Brooks's name. The room went still. Mark's jaw clenched, color draining from his face. "That's ridiculous," he said quickly. "That boat." He stopped himself, realizing too late that denial had a sound. Donna took a step forward, calm, efficient, unforgiving. From the folder under her arm, she pulled a stack of documents, each one neatly tabbed and clipped. "Page 12, she said evenly, handing one to Pastor Ray, who passed it down the aisle like evidence in a courtroom. "Bank records, flagged by the trust's auditing software. Merchant code matches a boat dealership in Old Hickory." Gasps again. Low, collective, uncontrollable. Vanessa's hand found Mark's arm, but he shook her off. "That's not theft," he snapped, his voice cracking under the pressure. "It was for the family, for weekends, for—" Jerry didn't let him finish. "The family," she said softly, "didn't ask for it." Her words landed like a slap, not shouted, not cruel, but absolute. Mark's lips parted, but no sound came. He looked at her as if she'd betrayed him, as if she were the one who'd taken something precious. The truth was uglier than that. Vanessa stepped in, her smile trembling. Her voice smooth, but brittle. "We had an understanding," she said, looking around the room for support she no longer had. "Henry wanted Mark to—" Donna's voice cut through her like glass. "You had theft," she said. "That's what you had." Every head turned toward her. The words hung there, clean, merciless, final. Mark flinched, his composure fracturing in plain sight. His hand brushed his forehead, the motion nervous, almost boyish, before he forced a hollow laugh. "You're twisting this, Donna. You always—" "I have the receipts," she said simply. She laid them on the podium next to Jerry's trembling papers. A copy of the transaction report, the timestamp, the dealership invoice, Mark's signature printed neatly across the bottom. The sight of it broke something in the room. The last thread of illusion snapped. And what filled the space wasn't shock anymore. It was understanding. Jerry's eyes stayed fixed on the papers, her vision blurring slightly. It wasn't anger she felt. It was grief. Slow and heavy. The kind that comes when you finally see your child for who they really are. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Pastor Ray shifted, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the silence. "It appears the truth's been waiting its turn." Jerry blinked back tears, folding the will carefully on the podium, each crease deliberate. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she spoke again. "Your father knew, Mark. He knew, and he forgave you once already." Mark looked up sharply, panic flashing in his eyes. "No, he didn't—" She met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "He did. And then he made sure you'd never take from us again." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the air seemed to pause. Vanessa took a small step back, her heel catching on the edge of the rug. She reached for Mark's arm again, but he didn't move this time. He stood rooted, every muscle in his body locked in place. From the third row, Emma rose slowly to her feet. Her face was pale, her expression unreadable. But her voice, when it came, was quiet and certain. "Grandpa knew," she said softly. Every head turned toward her. Her eyes met Jerry's, and something passed between them, unspoken but undeniable. A shared strength, a line that connected generations through truth, through loyalty, through pain. Jerry gave her a tiny nod, pride and sorrow tangled together in her chest. Mark turned to his daughter, voice cracking. "Emma, don't—" But she didn't look at him, not anymore. The moment stretched, fragile and electric. Then Donna closed her folder with a sharp snap. "We're not done," she said. "There's one more section." The air shifted again. Everyone froze. Mark's face went bloodless, and Jerry, standing at the podium, felt the weight of what came next pressing against her chest like a heartbeat. The next page waited under her fingertips, heavy as judgment. For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. The will sat open on the podium like a wound that couldn't be closed. The pages had shifted under Jerry's trembling fingers, revealing the next section, but she didn't read yet. She needed something else. Something that would remind them all, including herself, who this was really about. Her husband. Not the scandal. Not the stolen money. Not Mark's public unraveling. Him. She reached into her purse, the same small black clutch she'd brought to every church service, every family wedding, every funeral. Inside was a single photo wrapped in a tissue, folded with the precision of memory. She unfolded it slowly. The image was sun-bleached from time. The small one-story house they'd bought in 1982, the paint a warm yellow even though the color had faded to near sepia. Out front, a younger version of herself stood barefoot on the porch, smiling at the man holding the camera. The man who had built that porch by hand. The man she'd loved long before they had money or expectations, or the kind of son who thought he could buy his way out of guilt. The whisper of recognition moved through the room as she lifted the photo. "This was the first house we bought," she said, her voice steady but low. "We didn't have much then. He used to joke that the paint was holding the walls together." A faint collective chuckle rippled through the room, small, hesitant, grateful for something human again. Jerry turned the photo over, running her thumb along the back where the ink had bled slightly with age. Her husband's handwriting, bold and uneven, was still clear. For her. Always. She traced the words once before setting the photo gently on the podium. "He wrote that after we closed on the house," she said quietly. "He told me he'd never build anything in this life that wasn't for me. For us." A silence followed, not heavy like before, but reverent. A space carved by love, remembered. Jerry looked up, her eyes sweeping the crowd. Many of them had known him. The man before the illness, before the trust, before the money had twisted things. She saw their expressions change as they began to recall the truth behind the headlines of Mark's curated grief. Pastor Ray stepped forward then, his weathered face softened by something like relief. "That man," he said, his voice carrying easily across the room, "never shut up about Geraldine." The words hit like a breeze through a closed room. Laughter, gentle, honest, broke out across the hall. The tension loosened its grip on the air, if only for a moment. A woman near the back nodded, whispering to the person beside her. "He always said she was the smartest thing he ever did." Another voice chimed in. "He used to brag about that garden she kept, said no landscaper could touch it." It spread, soft and unstoppable, like sunlight through broken clouds. Jerry's throat tightened. She hadn't cried in years, not even when the hospital called. But now, standing in front of a room full of people finally remembering him instead of the man his son pretended to be, she felt her composure slip. Her voice trembled when she spoke again. "He wasn't perfect," she said. "None of us are, but he believed in building things that lasted. Homes, friendships, promises." Her eyes found Mark. He was still standing, but barely. His complexion had gone blotchy, the confident veneer of control long gone. The whispers around him weren't about admiration anymore. They were about disbelief, pity, recognition. For the first time all afternoon, he looked small. And then, as if the weight of it all finally collapsed his spine, he sat down, hard. His chair screeched against the floor. The sound echoed through the room like punctuation. Vanessa reached for him, but he didn't move. His hands were clasped so tightly together they'd gone white. Jerry let the photo rest at the podium's edge, facing the crowd. The image of that small yellow house, their first dream, seemed to glow under the soft light of the chandeliers. Pastor Ray stepped closer, his tone low but warm. "He'd be proud of you, Jerry," he said, "for keeping your word." She nodded once, her jaw tightening as she blinked away a tear. "He made me promise to tell the truth," she whispered, "even if it broke everything else." Donna, from her place near the front row, lifted her chin. "Then let's finish it." Jerry glanced at her, then back to the paper. The final section of this revelation waiting beneath her hand. She could feel the pulse of the moment building again, quiet but certain. She reached for the next page. Her husband's handwriting trailed off mid-sentence near the top, the ink darker there, as if he'd pressed the pen harder just before signing. Before she could speak, a voice broke the hush. It was Emma. "Grandma," she said softly. "Can I read this part?" Jerry froze, her fingers still on the paper. The room turned toward the girl. Her voice was steady, her gaze unwavering. "I want to." The silence that followed wasn't the kind that suffocated. It was the kind that cracked open something sacred. Jerry nodded, sliding the page toward her granddaughter with a trembling hand. And as Emma stepped forward, Mark's head snapped up, eyes wide, panic flickering there like a dying flame. Whatever came next, he knew it would be the one thing he couldn't control. Emma stepped forward, her shoes whispering against the polished floor. For a heartbeat. She looked younger, 17 and unsure, swallowed by the stares of the adults around her. Then she took the page from her grandmother's trembling hand, unfolded it with careful fingers, and drew a long, steady breath. Jerry stepped aside, her hand lingering on the edge of the podium before letting go. She watched the girl who had once played hide-and-seek in her living room, who used to ask about every family photo on the walls, who used to listen. Now she stood there in front of everyone, poised, spine straight, jaw tight with quiet resolve. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the overhead lights. Emma began to read. Her voice was soft at first, quivering at the edges, but clear enough for every corner of the room to hear. "To Emma," she read, "who always asked questions, I leave everything." A collective murmur moved through the guests, disbelief flickering from one face to another. Even Donna looked momentarily still, her expression unreadable. Mark's head jerked up, eyes widening, his face draining of color. "What?" The word came out strangled, almost a whisper, as if he couldn't trust his own hearing. Vanessa clutched her pearls, an unconscious, reflexive motion, and looked around as though someone might intervene. No one did. Emma blinked rapidly, steadying her voice as she continued. "Because she saw through noise," she read, her throat tightening, "and valued truth." The air shifted. The weight of her grandfather's words, clear, unflinching, final, hung over the crowd like a church bell's toll. Emma stopped for a second. Her lip trembled. She faltered, taking in a breath that hitched halfway through. Jerry reached out, a soft gesture of support. But Emma shook her head. No, I've got it. She wiped her cheek quickly and went on. He said, truth is the only inheritance that matters. Money disappears. Reputation fades. But honesty, her voice cracked. That's the part that lives. The room had fallen utterly silent again. No whispers this time. No nervous shifting. Only the sound of Emma's voice, clear and unwavering now, filling the air that had once belonged entirely to Mark. Vanessa tried to recover her composure, her voice a brittle whisper cutting through the stillness. This is absurd, she hissed. She's a child. She doesn't even understand what she's reading. But before she could say more, Pastor Ray raised a hand, the movement so calm yet commanding that it stopped her cold. Let her finish, he said softly. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a benediction. Emma's eyes lifted from the page. He left everything to me, she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. Then, lowering the paper, she looked straight at her father. But you know what, Dad? Her tone wasn't angry. It wasn't vengeful. It was heartbreakingly calm. I don't want his money. Mark blinked. For a second, his mouth opened as if to speak, but nothing came. Emma took one step forward, her hands still shaking, but her voice steady as a thread pulled taut. I want her legacy. She turned toward her grandmother. Yours. His. The one you built together. That's what I want to protect. The words struck something deep, something ancient in Jerry. Her hand flew to her mouth, the tears she'd fought back all evening finally slipping free. Donna moved then quietly, efficiently, setting a folder on the podium. Inside, a single document gleamed under the church lights, the official property transfer forms, notarized and complete. The will names Emma as successor to all holdings, Donna said simply. Including the Brooks estate. Gasps spread across the crowd. Mark surged to his feet, voice breaking. No, this is manipulation. You think I'm just going to... Sit down, Donna said. The calm in her tone hit harder than any shout could have. You've done enough talking. Mark hesitated, frozen in place. Vanessa's lips trembled as she looked between them, her perfect facade unraveling thread by thread. Henry would never... He did, Pastor Ray interrupted gently, and we all just heard it. Emma's hand fell to the table beside the podium. The old photograph of the yellow house still lay there, her grandfather's scrawled message visible to everyone. For her, always. She touched it lightly, the way someone touches the past when they realize it belongs to them now. When she looked up again, her face was wet with tears, but her expression was resolute. He meant all of us, she said. The ones who tell the truth, even when it hurts. The room was so quiet you could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator from the buffet line. Jerry's breath caught in her throat. The crowd's collective silence wasn't disbelief anymore. It was reverence. Then, from the far end of the room, someone began to clap. Soft, tentative. One pair of hands, then another. And then a few more. Mark turned, horror twisting his face as the applause grew. Not loud or mocking, but slow, solemn, acknowledging something inevitable. Jerry's eyes glistened as she reached for Emma's hand. But before she could speak, Mark's voice tore through the applause, raw, jagged. You think this is over? He spat. You think any of you can take what's mine? The room froze again, all heads turning toward him. Jerry's grip on Emma's hand tightened. Mark's face was flushed now, his breath coming fast, every trace of charm gone. You have no idea what you've done, he said, staring straight at his daughter. Emma met his gaze. Her chin didn't tremble this time. Yes, I do, she said quietly. I told the truth. And for the first time, Mark looked afraid. The next morning broke gray and cold, the kind of Tennessee dawn that looked like the world was holding its breath. The storm that had gathered the night before had moved on, but the air still smelled of rain and smoke. In Mark's kitchen, the countertops gleamed, untouched from the cleaning service that came every Wednesday. The coffee pot gurgled to life, but he didn't drink any. He stood in front of the island, phone pressed tight to his ear, the veins in his neck visible. "I don't care what was filed," he said, his voice cracking from exhaustion. "You pull it. You understand me? File a counterclaim. Whatever you have to do. I'm not letting them take my father's estate." On the other end, his attorney's tone was cautious, professional, and utterly unmoved. "Mark, Donna Pierce filed the documents herself. The will's been accepted and time-stamped by the county clerk. Once that happens, it's binding. Any contesting action would be. I pay you to find ways around things, not to recite the damn rule book," Mark snapped, slamming his palm on the marble countertop. His voice echoed through the cavernous kitchen, bouncing off the high ceilings and empty calm of a house that suddenly felt too large. There was a pause on the line. Then the attorney said quietly, "You might want to think about optics right now. Public challenges look messy." Mark hung up. He stared at the phone in his hand, his reflection distorted in the black screen. His own face looked older, meaner, like someone he didn't recognize. From the living room, Vanessa's voice cut through the silence. "Mark? My card just declined at the florist." He didn't answer. "Mark?" she said again, sharper now, stepping into the kitchen. She was still in her silk robe, hair pinned, face pale beneath the morning light. "It declined. At the florist. And then again at the gas station." He looked at her without speaking. Vanessa frowned, reaching for her phone to check her banking app. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped the screen once, then again. Then she froze. What do you mean, account frozen?" Mark's silence said it all. Her head snapped up. "They froze the trust?" He gave a hollow laugh, humorless, ragged. "Looks that way." Vanessa's mouth fell open. For the first time in 20 years, she looked less like a socialite and more like someone cornered. "You said this wouldn't happen," she whispered. "You said you took care of it." He turned away from her, jaw tightening, eyes fixed on the rain-slick street outside. "So did he," he muttered. Vanessa stood there a moment longer, her voice shaking now. "What are we supposed to do, Mark?" But he didn't answer. He was already dialing again. Across town, in a smaller kitchen, the kind that smelled like bread and clean linen, Jerry sat at her old oak table, the one she'd refused to replace even when Mark offered her something modern. A fresh pot of coffee steamed between her and Donna, who was quietly sorting through papers, reading glasses perched low on her nose. "The filing went through before midnight," Donna said, sliding a stamped document across the table. "He'll find out soon enough." Jerry nodded slowly, fingers brushing the embossed seal. "He already knows," she said softly. Donna studied her face. "And how are you holding up?" Jerry didn't answer right away. She was watching the sunlight creep across the linoleum floor, the soft hum of her refrigerator filling the quiet. "It's strange," she said finally. "I thought it would feel like victory, but it just feels done." Donna gave a small nod. "That's what truth feels like. It doesn't shout. It settles." The doorbell rang. Jerry's heart gave a small, startled jump. Donna raised an eyebrow. "I'll get it," Jerry said, pushing herself up. Her knees ached a little as she crossed the room. When she opened the door, Emma stood on the porch, her hair damp from the drizzle, her eyes uncertain. "Grandma," she said softly. "Can I come in?" Jerry smiled. "You don't have to ask." Emma stepped inside, her shoulders hunched like she was carrying something invisible. Donna gathered her papers quietly and gave them both space, retreating toward the den. For a long moment, Emma just stood there, staring at the worn table, the framed photos on the walls, snapshots of a life that now technically belonged to her. Finally, she turned. Was I really enough for this? Her voice cracked just a little, but it was enough to pierce the quiet. Jerry's eyes softened. You were the only one who listened, she said. Emma swallowed hard. I don't know if I can do what you did. You don't have to, Jerry replied, moving closer. You just have to remember why we did it. The rest will take care of itself. She reached for a folder on the counter, an older one, edges frayed, her handwriting scrawled across the top. Inside were the house deed and the transfer papers Donna had prepared. Jerry slid them toward Emma. What's this? The house, Jerry said simply. It's yours now. Emma blinked, confused. Grandma, no, I don't. It's time it belonged to someone who understands what it's worth. Jerry interrupted gently. Not the price. The worth. Tears welled in Emma's eyes. But what about you? Jerry smiled faintly. I've had a good home. I just needed to make sure it went to the right hands. The words hung there, soft and final, like a benediction. From the hallway, Donna reappeared, her tone brisk but kind. I'll file the deed this afternoon. Emma stared down at the papers, the edges trembling in her hands. She looked back at her grandmother, eyes shining with equal parts love and fear. Grandma, she whispered, he's going to come after us. Jerry's face didn't change. Her voice was calm, almost serene. Let him. A moment of silence stretched between them. Then the phone on the counter began to ring. The sound was sharp, insistent. Jerry didn't move to answer it. Who is it? Emma asked quietly. Jerry's eyes stayed fixed on the rain outside. Someone who's about to learn what it feels like to lose control. The phone kept ringing, echoing through the house, until finally it stopped. The courthouse in downtown Nashville smelled faintly of old paper, coffee, and rain-soaked coats. The kind of smell that carried stories of decades of arguments, verdicts, and things people wished they hadn't said. Jerry sat at the plaintiff's table beside Donna, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore the same gray suit she'd worn to her husband's memorial, a quiet act of defiance. Across the aisle, Mark leaned close to his attorney, whispering fast, his jaw tight enough to crack. Vanessa sat one row behind him, sunglasses perched on her head even though the room was dim. The bailiff's voice cut through the low murmurs. All rise. Everyone stood as Judge Miriam Gable entered, a woman with a reputation for hating theatrics and a soft spot for handwritten wills. She adjusted her glasses, glanced over the file in front of her, and nodded for everyone to sit. Mr. Brooks, she said, looking at Mark's lawyer, you requested this hearing to contest your father's will. I trust you have new evidence to justify the court's time. The attorney, a man too smooth for his own good, stood. Yes, Your Honor. We intend to show that the updated will was written under coercion, specifically by Mrs. Geraldine Brooks, who we believe exerted undue influence over her husband in the final weeks of his life. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Jerry didn't flinch. Donna's pen clicked once, a small, sharp sound that cut through the air like punctuation. The lawyer gestured toward Jerry. The changes were substantial, unexpected, and occurred when Mr. Brooks was under medical care and heavy medication. The result, my client's complete disinheritance, suggests manipulation. Thank you, Counselor, Judge Gable said, her tone dry. Do you have proof? He smiled thinly. We have testimony that Mrs. Brooks handled all correspondence with the estate attorney. Donna's eyebrow arched. That would be me, she said. The courtroom chuckled softly. The lawyer pressed on. We believe this revision was not the true intent of the deceased. Donna rose smoothly before Jerry could respond. Permission to submit rebuttal evidence, Your Honor? Proceed. the judge said. Donna walked to the evidence table with the deliberate calm of someone holding a royal flush. From her briefcase, she removed a small black device, a digital recorder, its edges worn from years of use. She placed it gently on the table. "I anticipated this," she said. "Mr. Brooks's father asked me to document every revision meeting for transparency. This recording," she said, clicking it on, "was made in my office 2 months before his death. It's time-stamped, verified, and stored in 3 separate encrypted backups." Mark shifted in his seat. "What recording?" he demanded, his voice a mix of disbelief and panic. Donna ignored him. She pressed play. The speaker crackled, and then Henry Brooks's voice filled the room. Low, calm, unmistakably alive. "Donna, I want to make this clear. Geraldine and I have discussed this together. This is my decision. Mine alone." The sound of a chair creaked. Then, faintly, Jerry's voice, soft in the background. "Are you sure, Henry? You don't have to rush." "I'm sure," he replied. "If our son wants to build his own empire, he can start without mine. What I've earned should go to the one person who still listens." The recording continued. "Read it back to me," Henry said. Donna's voice echoed through the speakers, reading line by line the same clauses Jerry had spoken at the memorial. Each word crisp, deliberate. "And sign," Henry said at the end, his pen scratching audibly on the paper. "You want me to witness?" Donna's recorded voice asked. "Please, and make a copy for Geraldine to keep safe. She'll know when it's time." The playback ended. The room went silent except for the faint hum of the ceiling fans. Judge Gable leaned forward, her expression unreadable. "That's time-stamped?" "Digital log, video backup, and the physical notary seal," Donna confirmed. "All verified." The judge turned her gaze to Mark. "Mr. Brooks, I assume you were unaware of this recording?" Mark's lips moved, but no words came. His lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently, but Mark's hands were already trembling. Across the room, Vanessa covered her mouth, color draining from her face. Judge Gable tapped her pen once, then set it down. "This court finds the will to be valid and enforceable. Mr. Brooks's father spoke clearly and without coercion. This will stand." The gavel struck once, sharp and final. Mark's lawyer straightened, face pale. "We withdraw our motion, Your Honor." Jerry exhaled slowly, her fingers unclenching in her lap. Donna clicked off the recorder and gave her a small nod. More victory than celebration. More truth than triumph. Mark remained seated, staring straight ahead, his breathing shallow. The sound of the gavel still hung in the air like an echo that wouldn't fade. Vanessa leaned close to him, whispering something, but he didn't hear her. His world had narrowed to a single sound, his father's voice, immortalized on that small device, saying words that could never be taken back. As the courtroom emptied, Emma appeared at the back, clutching her grandmother's coat. Jerry smiled faintly when she saw her. "Let's go home," she said quietly. But as they reached the courthouse steps, a cold wind rose, scattering leaves across the marble. Jerry stopped for a moment, her gaze distant, thoughtful. Emma touched her arm. "Grandma?" Jerry's eyes were calm, but there was something heavy behind them. "That recording was his way of finishing the conversation he started with me," she said. Emma frowned. "What do you mean?" Jerry looked out over the city, the sky pale and endless. "He wanted me to read the truth out loud, but he made sure it could never be buried again." The wind carried her words away, leaving only silence. And in that silence, Mark Brooks watched from the courthouse door, eyes hollow, jaw clenched. He hadn't lost a courtroom battle. He'd lost his father's last word. The house smelled like comfort, like onions slow cooking in oil, cornbread crisping in the oven, and chili simmering the way Henry always liked it, heavy on cumin, light on tomatoes. Steam curled lazily from the pot as Jerry stirred it, her movements unhurried for the first time in months. Outside, the sun was sliding behind the bare oaks, washing the kitchen in gold and quiet. The chaos of courtrooms and whispers and accusations was finally somewhere far away. Donna was the first to arrive, tapping twice on the screen door before letting herself in. "Something smells like peace," she said, setting down a bottle of red wine on the counter. Jerry smiled. "Peace with a little paprika." Pastor Ray followed soon after, his long frame nearly filling the doorway. He carried a pie, apple, from the diner he'd been going to since the 80s. "Don't get too excited," he said, setting it down. "They started using canned filling." "That's fine," Jerry said, ladling chili into a ceramic bowl. "Canned counts as effort at our age." When Emma arrived, the kitchen light caught the shine in her hair. She carried a small recording microphone clipped to her shirt, a laptop bag slung over her shoulder. "Don't mind me," she said, setting up on the sideboard. "I'm starting the digital archive. Grandpa deserves a history that doesn't disappear." Donna raised an eyebrow, already pouring herself a glass of wine. "A digital archive, huh? Sounds official." Emma smiled shyly. "It will be." They all gathered around the table: Donna, Ray, Emma, and two of Jerry's oldest friends from the library who had helped her through the lonely years after retirement. The chatter was soft, the laughter gentle. No one checked a phone. No one watched the clock. When they bowed their heads for Pastor Ray's blessing, the only sound outside was the wind rustling the maple leaves. His voice was low, reverent, but not formal. "For truth that hurts and heals," he said, eyes lifting briefly toward Jerry. "And for the people who still dare to tell it." "Amen," murmured the table. The clinking of silverware followed, a kind of music in itself. Jerry filled her bowl last, taking the seat at the head of the table where Henry used to sit. The chair felt larger now, not emptier. She looked at them, the people who had stayed when everything else fell apart. The chili was spicy, smoky, a little too thick, but nobody complained. Donna tore a piece of cornbread in half and said, "You should bottle this, you know. Call it Vindication Stew." Laughter rippled around the table. Even Emma smiled as she adjusted her mic and hit record. "Okay, Grandma," she said, "tell me about 1982, the Yellow House." Jerry leaned back, her eyes softening. "That house was a mess," she began. "We bought it for $17,000, and the roof leaked every time it rained. Your grandfather said it was an honest roof. It only told the truth." The room chuckled, but Jerry's tone stayed wistful. He spent the whole summer fixing that place. Every night he'd come in covered in paint and sawdust, smelling like cedar and sweat. And he'd still insist on dancing with me in the kitchen before bed, even when the radio didn't work. Emma's fingers hovered over the keyboard, typing gently. "You still have the radio?" "In the garage," Jerry said. "Still doesn't work." Donna lifted her wine. "To broken radios." Then, "To broken radios." The table echoed, glasses clinking softly. The warmth from the food, from the laughter, from the small fire in the hearth filled the house until even the corners that had once felt cold seemed to hum. Jerry could almost see Henry sitting at the end of the table, his hand around his mug, his grin a little crooked. She reached for her old journals stacked on the buffet behind her. The covers were cracked, pages stuffed with recipes, pressed flowers, grocery lists, and half-finished letters. "These should go in your archive, too," she told Emma. Emma took them carefully, reverently. "I'll scan every page." The conversation drifted from there, to books, to old church picnics, to Donna's claim that she'd once beaten Henry at darts, which Ray immediately disputed. The laughter rose, faded, rose again. When the plates were cleared, Emma set the recorder down, saving the file. "That's our first entry," she said softly. "The Brooks Legacy Project, Volume 1. Jerry smiled. He'd like that. "Would he like chili stains on his legacy?" Donna teased, wiping a spot from Emma's sleeve. "Absolutely," Jerry said. "He'd call it proof of life." The table fell quiet again, but this time it was a good quiet. Peaceful, not heavy. Outside, a single streetlight flickered on, painting the porch in pale gold. Pastor Ray leaned back in his chair, sighing contentedly. "Feels like something's finally ended," he said. Jerry stirred her tea. "Or begun," she said. From the living room, the grandfather clock chimed 7. Slow, deliberate. She looked around the table, Donna's sharp eyes softening with the glow of wine, Emma's gentle smile, Pastor Ray's weathered hands folded on the tablecloth, and felt a small, unfamiliar warmth settle in her chest. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was keeping a secret. She was just living. And as she glanced at the empty chair at the table's end, Jerry lifted her cup and whispered under her breath, "You'd have loved this one, Henry." The wind outside shifted, rattling the kitchen window just enough to make the candle flicker. Emma looked up from her laptop, noticing the movement. "Grandma?" Jerry smiled faintly. "Nothing, sweetheart. Just the house remembering." But deep down she could swear she heard it, faint and familiar. The creak of a floorboard, the echo of a man's laugh that seemed to linger just long enough to make her believe he never really left. And for once, Jerry didn't mind the silence that followed. It felt like home. The email arrived on a Wednesday morning, quiet, gray, ordinary. Jerry was sitting by the window, a cup of tea cooling beside her, when her laptop chimed. The subject line read, "I'm sorry, Mom." She stared at it for a long time. The cursor hovered over the unopened message, blinking like a heartbeat. Outside, the maple trees swayed in the breeze, scattering a handful of yellow leaves across the porch. For a moment she considered clicking it. Her finger even grazed the trackpad. But then she remembered the memorial, the crowd, the forced smiles, the warning hissed in her ear. "Don't embarrass me." She closed the laptop. And that was that. 2 days later, Donna stopped by with scones and gossip. She never said she read the business journal, but her tone betrayed her. "You hear about the buyers pulling out of Mark's downtown development?" she said casually, breaking a scone in half. "Ethics board's investigating some irregularities with his escrow accounts." Jerry didn't look up from her knitting. "Irregularities," she repeated, as if testing the word for bitterness. Donna shrugged. "Seems Karma can file paperwork too." Jerry smiled faintly. "That's between him and his conscience." She didn't ask for details. She didn't need them. She already knew that Mark's world, so perfectly polished, so carefully constructed, was unraveling faster than he could spin his way out. His partners had stopped returning calls. His name had disappeared from the local Chamber of Commerce newsletter. Vanessa had started showing up to church alone. Her diamond wedding band replaced by a slim gold band that looked more practical than proud. People whispered. Nashville had a way of doing that, with slow drawls and polite half-smiles. By the following week, his office sign was gone. The Brooks Development website redirected to a blank page. Jerry didn't feel triumph, only distance. She kept herself busy instead, tending to the house, rewriting a few of her old journal entries for Emma's archive, learning how to use the digital recorder. Some nights she'd sit at the kitchen table and talk into it softly, recounting small things Henry had loved, the smell of rain on pine, the way he folded napkins before dinner, the sound of laughter over a game of cards. When she played the recordings back, the quiet between her words was almost its own kind of peace. It was late afternoon when Emma came by. She'd been coming every Sunday since the dinner, usually with coffee and a burst of energy that filled the quiet house. This time, she came with an envelope clutched in her hand and an expression halfway between joy and disbelief. "I got in," she said breathlessly, holding it out. "Vanderbilt, history program." Jerry blinked, taking the letter carefully, her heart lifting in that quiet, fragile way that only good news can bring. "Oh, sweetheart." "I'm still in shock," Emma said, grinning through tears. "They offered me a partial scholarship, too. I want to focus on archival studies. Grandpa's project got me hooked." Jerry set the letter on the table, smoothing its creases with her fingertips. "He'd be proud," she said softly. "He always said you had an old soul?" Emma laughed. "You say that like it's a bad thing." "It's the best thing," Jerry said, her voice catching just a little. For a while they just sat there, watching the sun dip low over the lake beyond the backyard. It glinted off the water like pieces of gold too small to gather. Then Jerry stood. She walked to the old bookshelf against the wall and pulled down a thick, leather-bound notebook. Its pages were worn, the spine cracked from decades of use. A faded recipe card poked out from the middle, marked with a paperclip. "This," she said, placing it in front of Emma, "is the Brooks family cookbook. I started it the year we got married. Henry added his notes when he thought I wasn't looking." Emma opened it carefully, her eyes widening. There were recipes in Jerry's looping handwriting, smudged with sauce and love. Beside them, little annotations in a rougher hand, Henry's, scattered through the margins. "Needs more salt. Too much salt. Perfect. Don't change a thing." Jerry smiled. "It's yours now. You'll make new ones. Maybe even better ones." Emma looked up, startled. "Grandma, I can't." "You can," Jerry interrupted gently. "And you should. The house is yours. The stories are yours. And now, so is this. Just promise me you'll fill it with your own pages." Emma nodded, eyes shimmering. "I will." Jerry squeezed her hand. "Good." The light from the setting sun poured across the table, spilling over the open cookbook, the acceptance letter, and the half-empty mugs of tea. For a moment, everything was golden. Then the faint sound of Jerry's laptop chimed again. Another email. From Mark. The subject line read simply, "Please." Jerry looked at it for a long while, her reflection faint in the dark screen. Her hand hovered, just for a heartbeat, before she closed the lid with a soft click. "Who is that?" Emma asked. "No one who needs an answer," Jerry said quietly. Outside, a car door slammed somewhere in the distance. The evening air carried the sound of crickets beginning their chorus, the first true breath of summer on the way. Jerry glanced at Emma, then back toward the window. "You make this house yours," she said again. "Don't let it ever become a place for silence." Emma smiled, nodding, and as the last of the sunlight faded, Jerry reached for her tea, her voice low but sure. "I've forgiven him," she said softly, "but I don't owe him peace." The wind rattled the screen door gently, almost in agreement, and for the first time, Jerry realized she wasn't waiting for an ending. She was already living the one she'd earned. The article appeared on a Sunday morning, tucked between the local headlines and the lifestyle section. "The Widow Who Spoke." Jerry didn't buy the paper herself. Donna dropped it off, folded open to the exact page, a steaming mug of coffee in one hand. "You might want to read this before your neighbors do," she said, setting it on the table. The photo was small, but striking. Jerry at the podium on the day of the memorial, hand clutching her husband's will, light from the church windows glinting off her gray hair like a halo. The piece was simple, unembellished. It didn't talk about the scandal or the inheritance. It talked about integrity, about a woman who refused to be silent, about a promise kept in front of 100 people and a lifetime's worth of ghosts. Jerry read it once, then twice. then folded it neatly and placed it inside the old recipe book Emma had taken to digitizing, like a bookmark in a story that finally belonged to her. Across town, her name was on lips that had once only spoken Mark's. At church, people approached her with soft smiles and casseroles. At the farmer's market, strangers said, "Good for you, Mrs. Brooks," in that gentle southern way of people who both knew and pretended they didn't. But the thing that surprised her most wasn't the attention, it was the quiet. The peace that came when she realized Mark's name wasn't in the article once. Not even in the subtext. For the first time, her story wasn't about him. A few weeks later, Emma called from the public library. "Grandma," she said, barely containing her excitement, "they're giving us a full room for the archive, computers, scanners, everything. They want to feature Grandpa's journals and your letters." Jerry laughed softly. "You mean my grocery lists and half-baked thoughts?" Emma's voice brightened through the phone. "You'd be surprised what people want to remember." That evening, the two of them met at the library to unpack boxes. Old photo albums, yellowed newspaper clippings, Henry's handwritten blueprints, and those long, rambling letters he used to write from business trips. The local news had sent a photographer to document the opening. As flashbulbs clicked softly, Jerry found herself looking at the exhibit sign in the glass case. The Brooks Family Archive, a legacy of honesty and home. It was simple, unpretentious, just right. She felt something warm rise in her chest, the same quiet pride she'd felt the first time Henry brought her to that yellow house. The one they'd built together, nail by nail. Emma watched her from across the room, camera in hand, recording. "We're starting to get online donations," she said. "People want to help preserve small-town stories. Grandpa would love that." Jerry smiled. "He'd love that you're doing it." The library talk was scheduled for the following Saturday. They expected maybe 30 people. Nearly 100 showed up. Jerry sat at the front table with Donna and Pastor Ray, her heart pounding harder than it had in years. When her name was called, she rose slowly, smoothing her skirt, and walked to the podium. The applause started early, before she even spoke, and by the time it quieted, she could barely find her voice. She looked out at the crowd. Faces she knew, faces she didn't. Students, neighbors, a few reporters, but mostly people who'd come because they wanted to hear something real. "I never planned to be known for speaking out," she began. "I only planned to keep a promise." Her voice steadied as she went on, about truth, about family, about how silence had a way of protecting the wrong people if you let it. She told them about Henry, about the way he built things to last, and about Emma, who was now building something different, but just as strong. When she finished, the room erupted. A standing ovation, every chair scraping back at once, the sound of palms meeting like rain on a roof. Pastor Ray leaned toward her as the applause swelled. "He edited the past," he murmured, smiling gently. "You preserved it." Jerry laughed softly, her eyes glistening. "I just read what he wrote." Afterward, Emma joined her at the podium, her camera still recording. "Grandma," she whispered, voice thick with pride, "you gave me a map. I'll keep going." Jerry turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's face. "Then don't just follow it," she said. "Draw new lines." They stood together as the crowd lingered, Donna chatting with patrons, Ray shaking hands, the faint smell of paper and old wood wrapping around them like memory. When they finally stepped outside, the sky over Nashville was painted in shades of rose and gold. The streetlights blinked to life one by one, their reflections shimmering across the wet pavement. Emma slipped her hand into Jerry's. "Do you think he's watching this?" Jerry smiled. "If he is, he's probably correcting my grammar." They both laughed, soft and full. And as they walked down the library steps, the marquee lights behind them flickered one final time before glowing steady. The Brooks Legacy Project. curated by Emma Brooks. Jerry paused to read it, her heart catching just slightly. For the first time, the name Brooks belonged exactly where it should, to all of them. And somewhere behind them, in the glass doors reflecting the night, Jerry thought she saw the faintest hint of a man's shadow smiling back. The afternoon light spilled through the tall glass windows of the new community hall, painting soft reflections across the polished floor. Outside, the Nashville sky was a clear, unwavering blue, one of those rare spring days when even the air seemed to forgive the past. The banner above the stage read, "The Brooks Foundation for Historical Integrity," in honor of Geraldine and Henry Brooks. It wasn't lavish. Emma had insisted on that. The chairs were simple. The flowers came from the same florist who'd done Henry's memorial years ago. And at the center of the stage sat a single wooden podium, the same one Jerry had stood behind the day she read the will aloud. Now, that same podium stood waiting again. Jerry sat in the front row beside Donna and Pastor Ray, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Emma stood on stage, speaking to the small but full crowd, teachers, archivists, students, local families, a few reporters. "This foundation isn't about money," Emma was saying. "It's about keeping stories honest. My grandparents believed that truth was something you could build a home on." Her voice didn't waver. She was Henry's granddaughter, through and through, calm, clear, grounded. Jerry's eyes shimmered as she watched her. The hall felt alive, like breath itself had weight. Donna leaned over and whispered, "Your husband would have loved this." Jerry smiled faintly. He'd have complained about the banner font first. The audience chuckled as Emma stepped aside and gestured to the podium. "Before we close," she said, "I want to share something my grandfather left behind, a letter found in one of his old journals. It was sealed and marked, 'To be read only if she stands her ground.'" A ripple moved through the room. Emma opened the envelope carefully. The paper was yellowed, edges frayed, Henry's unmistakable scrawl looping across the top. Her voice shook just a little as she began. "If she reads this, it means she stood her ground. That's all I wanted." The crowd grew still. "Geraldine, you've always been the quiet one, the keeper of things. You saved receipts, recipes, arguments we never finished. But truth? You never let that gather dust. You saw what I didn't want to see, and you had the courage to say it aloud." Jerry pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "If they call you dramatic, let them. If they call you stubborn, thank them. It means they noticed. You gave our name weight again, the kind that can't be bought, only earned." Emma paused, glancing down at her grandmother. Jerry's face was wet with tears, the good kind, the kind that didn't burn but cleansed. "If she reads this," Emma continued softly, "then she's already done what I couldn't. She made the truth louder than the lie." A hush fell so deep that even the air seemed to still. When the letter ended, Emma folded it back along the creases and placed it gently on the podium. Nobody clapped. Not yet. It wasn't the kind of moment that needed applause. Donna reached for Jerry's hand, squeezing it tight. Pastor Ray bowed his head briefly, eyes glistening. Then, in his slow, deliberate voice, he said, "May this foundation carry the same grace that built the Brooks home, one truth at a time." He laid his hand over Jerry's shoulder and added quietly, "You've done the work, Geraldine. The rest belongs to history." Jerry turned toward him, smiling through the tears. And to Emma. Emma stepped down from the podium and slipped her hand into her grandmother's. The applause began then. Slow, rising, warm. Donna dabbed her eyes with a napkin she pretended was for her lipstick. "Well," she said, voice trembling, "I suppose this means the quiet librarian from Willow Creek made front-page history." Jerry laughed softly, shaking her head. "I never wanted to be a headline. No, Donna said. But you became a compass. Jerry didn't answer. She just looked up at the stage, the light pouring through the windows, the photo of her and Henry projected behind the podium, his grin forever easy, hers a little shy. In the back of the hall, the sound of wind pressed faintly against the glass, and in that instant, she knew he was there, not in ghost or memory, but in every word spoken, every truth preserved, every name now remembered for what it truly meant. She leaned toward Emma, her voice barely above a whisper. You know, your grandfather used to say I embarrassed him once. Emma looked at her, smiling. Did you? Jerry let out a small, breathy laugh, eyes shining as she looked back at the crowd, at the life she'd built out of the ashes of silence. My son warned me not to embarrass him, she said softly, almost to herself. She paused, the applause swelling again, the sunlight spilling across her face like forgiveness. So, I read the will aloud.